Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a very special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always. It's all you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, well, I'm here to talk off the stories of films, and I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, release stories, all the ingredients really that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films I tend to cover on this podcast lean towards the mainstream more than anything. They're films I'm interested in or invested in to some degree. I try not to do snark. I try not to punch down. This podcast is a celebration of cinema and a real appreciation of the fact that it's really, really hard to make a film. For this episode, what you've discovered is one of my occasional special episodes where I bring in a filmmaker to talk about their latest film or their body of work. And in the case of this episode, you get a bit of both. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by cinematographer Hoyte van Hoytema, Oscar nominated for the photography on Christopher Nolan's film Oppenheimer at the point that we're recording. So we talk quite a lot about Oppenheimer. We also talk throughout the conversation a little bit about David O. Russell's The Fighter, about the James Bond film Spectre, directed by Sam Mendes. James Gray's Ad Astra just quickly comes up, and then towards the end of the conversation I bring up the name Tomas Aldredson, with whom Hoyte van Hoytema has thus far made Let the Right One In and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. They were due to work on a third film together, and we get into that a little bit towards the end of the chat. Just one or two notes just ahead of listening. We recorded this in London, so at one point a police siren goes past. The police were after neither of us. I also mention Roger and James Deakins. Roger Deakins, of course, an Oscar-winning cinematographer. Roger and James Deakins, though, do the Team Deakins podcast, and I reference an interview that Hoyte van Hoytema did on that particular podcast. I hugely recommend it. He's quite mobile in his at times, and at one point he starts making hand gestures, which I try my best to discover. That sounds awful, but I think you'll follow the conversation. Other than that, I think I'm just going to get into the chat. I'm going to set this up with just a snippet of the trailer from Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, which is available on physical media now and is up for umpteen Academy Awards, not least one for Hoyte van Hoytema himself, and I will come to my chat with the man himself the other side of this. That then was a clip from the multi-Oscar nominated Oppenheimer, and I'm joined by, a man who's multi-Oscar nominated now, actually, thinking about it, Hoyte van Hoytema, which you've told me is the right way to pronounce your name.
Perfect. Yeah,
so, perfect. Hoyte van Hoytema, you are the director of photography on Oppenheimer. I should start by saying, you probably know that, I should start by saying a huge congratulations on your Oscar nomination. Just before we started recording, I was introducing my tin pot technology that I use to record this, and you were just saying something quite interesting about how you like older technology, about how.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm not intimidated. You were apologizing for your what you called a dodgy mic or something.
It's dodgy,
but
yeah.
It's a big and substantial piece of equipment here on the table, and I think it's a good thing.
Excellent. I'm going to take that. Could we start almost at the end of the story? Because we sit here, we're in a very, very nice London hotel, which I've nearly broken the table of. Yeah. I think you can probably confirm that. For a film that's, 5 months old, really. And ordinarily, once a film is 5 months old, we wouldn't be in a posh London hotel still talking about it. But this is a very different film, isn't it? I mean, it's not just because of the Oscar nominations, but because of what it's meant for cinema and almost like the cultural footprint it already seems to have.
Yeah, I think that we were all, slightly surprised and intimidated with the level of success it had, in on many different fields, both critically, but unexpectedly it was commercially quite a big thing as well, and people have been writing about it and talking about it, and I've been talking about it. It's amazing, and we can only be extremely grateful for it. But no, it wasn't anything that sort of came very expected.
Yeah, but you use the word intimidated. Is it a bit uncomfortable, just like the sheer glare of it?
I mean, uncomfortable is maybe not the right word. You know. I mean, right now it's a little intimidating in terms of award season. So we are all, rehashing, and we have to all start talking about something that we have stopped talking about for a long time, and that we're kind of done with. And now we're sort of stirring everything up again. No, but listen, in perspective, this is of course all fantastic, and if you start a film like this, and if you work on a film like this with this kind of subject matter and that kind of sort of gravitas of the subject itself and of the script, the biggest dream you have and the biggest wish you have is that people are going to see it and going to reflect over it, and that you can at least contribute something in order to spread it out as much as possible, and I guess we did something a little bit right, and I guess that we got what we sort of wanted and invested our passion in. So,
I mean, you said there that you'd almost come out of it and you find yourself going back in. One of the questions I'm going to ask you a bit further down the line is, if I look at your list of credits, you're not someone who takes 3 jobs a year.
Absolutely not. I don't have the stamina. Or the mind, or the I don't have the brilliance or the in order to do films back to back. I always need a little bit of a break in between, and I always I'm pretty specific with the work I do, and I would never take a script just sort of as a as an in-between thing that I think I can do adequate cinematography. I always feel that I really have to be interested in the subject matter, or that I really have to vibe nicely with a director. It's very important for me that chemistry between the director is very important, and therefore you see I tend to work with the same directors more times as well, which I really like. I always like that idea that you can use your previous films as prep for your next film.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first film you did with Christopher Nolan, of course, was Interstellar. Again, you're preempting my questions here. This is great. But I was listening to an interview you gave when you were when you worked on Interstellar, and you talked about when you work with the director for the first time, you're kind of stepping into the unknown. You don't actually know 3 months down the line you're going to still be friends or get on. I just wonder, 3-4 films down the line, this is number 4, obviously, with Christopher Nolan, what changes? What in terms of like the nerdy detail of a day-to-day changes from the person who was shooting Interstellar to the person who was shooting Oppenheimer?
I mean, one of the main thing that changes is that you don't have to waste time anymore in order to sort of throw in reference frames, right? Right. When you start working with somebody, it's there's always this period in which you're showing a lot of things to the other person. You're showing, like, I don't know, photography, paintings, music. You just want to sort of make sure that on a taste level and on a sort of reference level, you kind of connect, and you kind of you can throw something out, photography, and you can read somebody's reaction, and you can talk about it, etc., etc. But after you've done 4 films together, you know very much sort of the sphere of in which somebody is maneuvering. You know somebody more on a sort of an intuitive and a taste level. And with a new film, that's always a thing. That's always like like a new relationship. It's very exciting in many ways, but at the same time, you're always poking and feeling and testing grounds and so on. Yeah. And that sort of that sort of changes over the years. It's you can very often. I mean, you can often kind of compare it to relationships. For instance, they're the first months, they're very exciting. You're all the time. You have nerves and but later, when you know each other very long, you can spend days with each other without even saying something or speaking words, and you start answering questions in conjunction, and but at the same time, a special laugh has also deepened. You can speak for somebody, and somebody can speak for you. Now, I wouldn't necessarily want to speak for Chris at all, but what I do want to say is that you're creating a sort of a shortcut and a shorthand, and it's very nice to then do a film like Oppenheimer because we have sort of cut through the bullshit already prior, and I just have the feeling that it's for me, it's somehow much easier to approach what otherwise would be a very technical job in a much more sort of intuitive way, and lesser nerves and lesser fear, and more relaxed.
I was listening to you talk to Roger and James Deakins, actually, and I had no idea of your background of Polish film school, of soap, of supermarkets, of and the bit that broke my heart actually was when you spent a summer preparing to shoot someone's graduate film.
Oh yeah.
And then you were told you couldn't do the film after you put in the work. I just wonder, going back to that person at film school who was battling through against the person now, because you've almost implied Oppenheimer, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, is kind of a film you can make now. With you and Christopher Nolan, you built the experience, you built the shorthand, only now could you tackle that. I just wonder what the cinematographer then, in your 20s, would have made of now.
I would have been my own idol in many ways, I think.
I did that, yeah.
Back then, I had heroes as well. I had my heroes.
Who were your heroes?
Like, for instance, one of my biggest heroes throughout my life has been Robin Mueller.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that the further I get, sort of the better I start understanding him, and I start understanding his process, and I just when I see myself back then, the way you perceive or think about cinematography for me has been such a changing process, and not only throughout the big lines of my career, but from film to film as well.
Yeah.
And the meaning of what you do, sort of, and sort of the implications of how you do it, and how that influences the film, and the kind of the emotional connection you can make with an audience in specific ways. I mean, this changes, and it has evolved in many ways. So I'm of course I'm much more secure in the way I look at things, and the way I want to register things and then commit them to film for posterity has changed a lot. I have become, I think, a much less formal person, and I'm still learning very hard, but it has become much more sort of a second nature to me, or it has become a much more sort of intuitive process, opposed to in film school, you're so self-aware, you're so aware of, visuals, and you want to be seen in different ways without yet having the knowledge, for instance, and I don't know. I calm down a lot in that way.
I mean, are you? It sounds the oddest question to ask someone, but are you conscious that you're being studied now as well? Because you talked about your idol there and how you understood that Robin Mueller, I think you said, you're pro. But I read detailed interviews with you where people are asking you about lens choices, about ways you've adapted camera, and the level of interrogation of your work. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. I just wonder if you get any sense of that and how you feel about it.
Yeah, I of course I do get a sense of that just by the nature of all the questions I get fired.
Yeah, well, quite. Yeah.
But also, when I was a student, I adored talking to to more experienced cinematographers. You know, I was like so hungry to listen to them speak, and very often I also didn't really understand, you know, their motivations or what drove them, but you know, yet I was still always very obsessed and impressed and so on. And now I love giving master classes, for instance. You know, master class is a weird word, but but you know, students that are genuinely interested in becoming better cinematographers and just sort of trying to pull out of you, you know, everything you know, and me then realizing, oh, but you know, there's a lot of curiosity, and they want to know, and they project things on you that you maybe haven't even figured out, and so you yourself, you learn a lot from those you know, those questions and that curiosity, you know.
That's interesting. I read an article once where authors of famous books sat exam papers that had been set on their books, and they didn't know half of the answers and would have failed the exam on their own work.
I feel very often exactly the same. You know, it's like,
I love that.
You know, you can never really control what people project onto your work. You know, but it sometimes gives you angles, and you also sometimes learn that you, for instance, have been doing things intuitively that actually has a very sort of how do you call it, consequent pattern to it. Can't give you now a very concrete answer for that, but you know, people notice stuff, repeating stuff in your work that you kind of have never been aware of, and you say, oh yeah, that's kind of true, and and that's interesting, I think, you know.
One of the fascinating things I find about stories of Christopher Nolan film sets, and in fact quite a lot of film directors say a similar thing, is when they're actually on the set themselves, they try and make it as small as possible. That you, not just for cutting the noise from the outside, but for instance, Oppenheimer is a single camera shoot, as I understand it. I think it was you who was talking about the camera is the focal point of one of his sets. It's just like everything revolves around the camera. Do you get a sense, I mean, does that work in terms of a working pattern? Do you get a sense of the outside world? Do you get the kind of freedom to explore with almost like the safety blanket of a Christopher Nolan project is so secretive?
I mean, I think so. I mean, it's you know, it's still, you know, a job where you wake up in the morning and you drive to a set and have to go to work, you know, and start slowly after drinking a few coffees, and then you get
how many coffees do you need in a morning? Let's get to the big question.
Well, I'll keep them coming. It's like I drink coffee throughout the whole day, you know, until there's a rep and I realize I drank like 50 cups of coffee. Let me say it like that. I don't drink as much coffee as Chris drinks his tea.
Okay.
Chris is attached to a drip all day with a tea drip, an Earl Grey drip.
I mean, I related to what I just asked though. There was an interview you gave, and I'll credit them, motionpictures.org, and it was when you just made Nope with Jordan Peele. And this is what I mean about the protective cloak. The start of the interview, it said that you were, quote, speaking for undisclosed reasons from an enormous warehouse in London, and presumably that enormous warehouse is where you're building and experimenting for this film. This is your sample. Presumably that was Oppenheimer at that point.
Yeah, that was a wrong assumption.
Was that right? Was that
there was something else. I think when I was speaking about Nope to a journalist, I think I was working on the a big soccer spot.
Oh, okay.
For the World Championship.
Yeah.
At an undisclosed location somewhere in London.
Still undisclosed.
I love, you know, I love doing like smaller things in between. You know, that's kind
such
of
as adverts,
such as interesting commercials and so on. They are you know, short bursts of real fun work. They are usually a very nice playground for myself and my crew to do some crazy experiments and
That's
to play
interesting.
around and keep the technology alive and develop new things.
Yeah. I remember Tony Scott used to do that.
Yeah,
between
yeah,
a lot of
very
his
much
films.
so.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think Spy Game came out of him making a load of commercials, just Man on Fire as well.
Yeah, but I work, for instance, with a lot of great feature directors. That sometimes I would never do a feature with them, but it's nice to get to learn to know to work with different directors, or by the way, it's not only directors, but it's also crew members and so on. It's a very nice way to test your own sort of relationship and resilience towards other ways of working and other ways of doing things. It always keeps me fresh, those kind of things.
I'm very conscious I sort of asked you a question and didn't give you much of an opportunity to ask it, where about almost building the film and just the protective sphere of a Christopher Nolan set. So, for instance, you did a James Bond film, again, as you know, you did Spectre. The glare of everything is watching you shoot Spectre, whether you like it or not. Whereas that doesn't happen on a Nolan set. And I just wonder about the smallness again and why that matters.
I mean, shooting a film can be a very sort of unglamorous process, and I think that we all kind of love the idea of a film set not being very precious.
Yeah.
It's and you can allow this kind of unpreciousness and this kind of freedom to move around if you're not under too much scrutiny at the moment.
Yeah.
Of course, when you put your film together and take it out to the public, everything is very much under scrutiny, and there's multitude of eyes are aimed at it. But as you're working, you try to avoid it as much as possible. You try to pretend that that it's just the days at work, and I always like that idea that you're doing it in an atmosphere where you're kind of allowed to fuck up a little bit, and where everybody can kind of make their mistakes, as long as they come from a good place or a good intention, and I've always the feeling that Chris creates that sort of atmosphere, that playground very much, where people can they work hard, but they can also screw up. So they're sort of best part of themselves, and most creativity gets unleashed, I think, under those kind of circumstances.
So, I mean, going back to the Roger Deakins podcast you did, and you talked about it quite candidly there, that you went to work with David O. Russell, for instance, on The Fighter, and you worked far away from Hollywood so that you could have the freedom to really explore and experiment. But also, it sounded like you were very conscious of, I think around that time, and I only bring it up because you mentioned it in that podcast, a clip of David O. Russell going a bit nuclear on one of his sets. So I just wonder, walking into something like that, where do you have protective armour up that you don't necessarily have now?
Yeah, the thing is, you have a lot of protective armor up, and what I learn, or what I've learned, is that going to work with protective armor up is a very uncreative space to be in. I think the most boring work comes from people that are either very afraid to screw up, or are overtly and obsessively precious about very specific things. So I always have the feeling that before you go to work, you have to shake it off, and you have to sort of skim through the bullshit and skim through the preciousness and just be as open as you can. And that's another thing about being open and being creative that has also something to do with the fact that you don't feel scrutinized on every step. You kind of it's that thing of that concept of spitballing, for instance, right? The old concept of spitballing is that like if you want to come up with something in a room with people, you have to have the feeling that you're allowed to say something stupid, and you have to also sometimes you have to blurt out the stupid in order to come to something that is more interesting.
Yeah.
And if you're in a room with people and everybody in the room has the feeling that they only can say, things when they're already percolated and they're already crystallized, it can become a very stagnative process, I think. So when you work, for instance, with the concept of ideas, an idea is one of the most can be one of the most fragile entities in existence when they start. It's an idea, and anybody with a little less mercy, at the moment you blurt out an idea, has the ability to kill it off completely.
Yeah.
At the snap of a finger. And that's also very much part of my job. Is like, you come up with an idea, you have to nurture it, you have to sort of water it like a plant, and you have to sort of be very careful around it and tread lightly around it. But then that idea can grow into something that is stronger and more interesting and more nuanced and more complex, and so I think a film set is the same. It's a lot of people that have ideas, and some are brilliant and some are less brilliant, but they have to sort of have the chance to bloom.
I got sent in my first job on a terrible training course in my very early 20s, not related to film in the slightest. And I got told the best working environment is somewhere where someone can give you bad news fast without fear of being totally absolutely chased up. Yeah. But by the sounds of it, that's kind of what you've got there as well. Yeah, you just also don't want to have the stagnative bullshit. The idea that when you blurt something out stupid, somebody will decapitate you or will ridicule you, or I notice it very much with my own crew. Everything trickles down very much as well. So if I'd broken one of the cameras that you'd modified particularly for this shoot, you're not going to slaughter me on the spot if I come and tell you. No, people break stuff all the time. Absolutely, yeah. And I only ask this because it's not talked about much. That's all. I'm not implying that you're going to slaughter me in this room. No, and it's not necessarily that people break things all the time. Yeah. But you also you very much with equipment. You drive it like you stole it. As big and precious everything is, you wanna be respectless with it. You wanna use, for instance, your cameras. You wanna use them like charcoal. Like setting up a sketch on charcoal. It's very much for me like that. Of course, you have a lot of people around that take very good care of the equipment, and they're very, but like any good focus puller or any good rental company in Hollywood, they know, never tell your artist to be careful with the camera. You want to send your equipment out in the world and tell them, do whatever you want with it. Throw it off a mountain, That's the Kubrick way, wasn't it? Just so that you, as the end user of it, don't feel limited whatsoever by technology or weighted down with the technology, or it's the same when you shoot film and magic's happening. It's the worst thing for a director to have to calculate how much money. Every next take is going to cost. You have to kind of shake those kind of things off. There was a screenwriter whose name I've completely forgotten, but I'll edit in somewhere along the line. Who was talking recently about how when they're writing a film, what they're not trying to come up with is memorable dialogue. They're not trying to come up with the line that's going to be in quote books for the rest of time. Yeah. And when they're in the trenches, they're not overtly looking for that. It should happen organically. I read that, and instantly, I didn't even know I was going to be talking to you at this point. I just thought about the shot of Cillian Murphy. He's not quite looking down the lens, is he? But he's pretty much down the lens, slap bang in the middle of the frame, and Well, I mean, when I look at Oppenheimer again, so much of it is slap bang in the middle of the frame.
Center
I appreciate a part of that is because I've been reading about the IMAX cameras and the fact that you have to reframe in certain ways. But I remember as a kid going to watch Scorsese's Cape Fear, for instance, and nearly jumping out of my skin when Robert De Niro almost broke the rules of cinema and just walked right up to the camera. Yeah. Can you talk about just the fact that, I mean, you're shooting a lot of time human beings with IMAX cameras, but also, as I understand it, you're fairly loose about which camera is right for the moment. I don't understand how you do it. I know it sounds like the most basic and dim question, but I don't get it. I don't understand how I've got to the end of the film and that image is absolutely ingrained on my mind. And I'm just hoping that you've got some insight into why my head is responding that way.
Yeah,
it's everywhere, that image. It's
it's a hard thing to ask me how I did it.
You're the Oscar nominee. I think you've got a better shot.
But I also think good. For me, cinematography is not about pretty pictures or singular images.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with the screenwriter analogy. Yeah,
I think that it's the quality of your image plus whatever the audience projects onto it. It's what you're looking at is a very subjective experience that is coming out of watching very specific things that went prior to that. It's like when you get a very specific note at the end of a symphony, it's not the brilliance about that note, but it's where that note is placed and what has led up to that note that makes that specific note stand out or very brilliant. And that's in a way with an image at the end of a film as well. Now, of course, there's some sort of consciousness about it when you do things and the way you sort of distribute yourself dynamically over a film. You work a lot with restraint and you're holding yourself back a lot in order to give power to things that come later, or is how frontal are you, what kind of angle do you shoot. I mean, that doesn't have only implications on the picture at that very time, but it also has implications on how you read the film throughout and how you, for instance, can gain strength towards the end, etc., etc. So it's in a way a long stamina struggle throughout the film, and you kind of have to feel, you kind of have to start hearing the music in order to understand that. So,
but do you feel a eureka moment in your work, whether it's like you find a stock of film that you just instantly know, or you've adapted a camera in such a way, or a lens, or a particular shot, and instantly, hang on, that's something special that you.
And we're feverishly looking for those kind of things as well. Prior to the film, we were testing endlessly in the beginning, and for instance, a lot of these experiments, they're very technical, and they are there because we want to solve very specific technical solutions, for instance, here and there. But a lot of those experiments, they also result in you seeing certain things that you in a very intuitive way respond to, and from there on you start developing it. It's like, for instance, the close-up in this film and the proximity of the camera towards the faces. We felt that in order to create a sort of an intimacy, we needed to get the camera closer to the faces, physically closer to the faces, because the moment that you shoot a face closer with the camera more proximate, your depth perception changes a lot, and also physically in a cinema you actually feel the proximity of the camera very much, and that was a challenge with the IMAX camera, of course, because the IMAX camera was originally built for landscape. So then suddenly we start to come up with technical ways to do it. We transformed, for instance, for this one's a 40 and tweaked the close focus of that lens.
I was reading that.
those lenses so that suddenly we could do close-ups on a much wider lens. You know.
What are you like at home? I mean, do you do much DIY and things like that? Is it?
I do.
Yeah.
I have a.
It's not a churlish question. I'm just curious if
yeah.
you've got a natural puzzle solving.
Yeah, I do. I have a metal workshop in my backyard.
Is that right?
I have
What's your favourite thing you've made in your metal workshop?
Oh, well, I made a lot of it's a lot of things. Like some things are a little bit more aesthetical, artsy, kind of abstract things. But then I always build like little contraptions. I build a camera crane. I build lights. I build rigging, weird rigging, construction equipment, and so on. I have a lathe. I have a big industrial CNC machine. I'm very serious about it. Yeah. And I'm constantly, I also love that concept of making, using like mechanics or complex mechanics for in order to create very intuitive and very abstract ideas. Communicate feelings with engineering is a very beautiful thing. I think it's something I'm very excited about.
So is it the case that the best cinematographers are a cross between a storyteller and a problem solver?
No, like I said in the beginning, I don't know what the best cinematographer is, and I also know that they all work very, very different. I mean, there's amazing cinematographers that that have some sort of an allergy or aversion towards technology and work very poetic and do it with a very big drive and only handle this equipment out of necessity, and then angrily try to tweak things around it and make things that are extremely poetic and beautiful. And then you have cinematographers that that are very rigid and conceptual and almost anal. And
well, if I can put this to you then, I mean, I was reading about how you did Dunkirk, because I saw Dunkirk framed two different ways in IMAX, oddly enough, which I didn't appreciate until the second time I see it. I was just like, this feels just very, very tiny bit different. And I found a line, it was IndieWire you spoke to, who talked about how you built special lenses with snorkel attachments so you could get into the cockpit and reorient the camera and find places to put it. And then there's this line, that took months of research with Panavision and IMAX just to be able to get what in your head was presumably the shot that you'd identified very early on.
So, or the shot, or let's call it more perspective, the way we wanted to look into this world. That's kind of thing, and that's very often the case as well. It's like a camera is effectively your film plane. It's the film that goes by a gate. Yeah. And that defines very much your sort of your resolution and your color depth, etc., etc. But how you project an image onto that gate, that is where you get to the lenses and the objectives, and that inherently brings a lot of limitations, and so we were very much thinking like, well, this is kind of the best way of capturing. Yeah. But now we have to sort of invent how we can, what mechanics we can build in order to be able to capture on this specific medium. And that has been very often is a little bit of our engineering is about, and specific in those cockpits, how a GoPro camera, if you tape it to your forehead and you turn your head left and right, you get this very specific sort of first person point of view, and this nodal point, the pivot of the camera is very much on the axis of the lens itself. And that's of course very difficult if you have a camera that is 3 feet long. Because then your nodal point is far from where the lens turns. So looking like a subjective point of view, I'm going to show it, but it will be like that, and it will feel very unnatural to you. But then how can we get to IMAX? We can get a feeling that you're actually getting a very human nodal point of view. So so we built lens relays, which basically would put the camera on the side, on its back, poking upwards. But then instead of a lens pointing upwards, it's a relay system that has a lens bowing like a little snorkel.
Yeah.
And
I should point out for the audio, he is doing the hand gestures to demonstrate this as well.
And so your film plane suddenly will be here, and then you can just look around like an alien poking his head out.
Yeah.
And that gives a very strong feeling of first person point of view. And so you have this gigantic machine with this weird thing poking out for a very sort of humane creation of a very humane way of looking at things.
Yeah, and you'll never use it again. It's just for
that's for that. But that interesting development, for instance, that relay system, we reused on Oppenheimer. Where what we wanted to do is we wanted to create a way to photograph macro shots and micro shots, but to be able to see them as if you were the tiniest human being looking up at it. You can Let me. This gets very nerdy, but
nerdy's good.
You want to do a macro shot of a finger, and you imagine. You put your camera here, and your camera is gigantic, and you can get very close to your finger. You can get almost on cellular level.
Yeah.
But what if this is what you're photographing, the top of your finger? What if you want to look at it from underneath, and it's like a mountain that is sort of above you?
Yeah.
Then you need to create a relay system in which you can actually put an IMAX camera here, but have a lens system that can look right there, right?
Your masterclasses must be something.
and that's what we built because Andrew Jackson, our a genius visual effects supervisor, and Scott Fisher, our special effects, and they have been working tirelessly for months to create all these science experiments that were brilliant, like rotating ping pong balls, inflating balloons that would light from the inside, and
the grin
on
your face as you're describing this is just priceless.
And fire, smashing through the darkness. But then we also wanted to find ways to photograph that, and so we built that snorkel lens that enabled us to do that. And these are fantastic little science projects that we had to do all the way along. And
I'm going to be chucked out of this room soon. I want to track you down to talk about Ad Astra on a separate occasion, because I think that's a fascinating one. I'm just curious, how did you find the way that you work in the middle of the frantic nature of a Bond film? Because as I understand on Spectre, I think Spectre looks extraordinary. But that was where it sounds like you just didn't have the space, just because if I've got it right, Sam Mendes once told me that it was completed 2-3 days before the film was premiered. And it just sounds whenever I look at the schedule of a Bond film, it starts shooting in January and it's out in October, and that's boggling to me. I'm just wondering, did you find that environment as challenging, as interesting?
I did, because I think you're more talking about the sort of the frustration of the post process, and if you do a film and you leave a lot to CGI and so on, the moment you wrap a film, you're very much in the hands of that whole process. And I think that was on Bond, and specifically on Spectre, we had a lot of that.
But did you have the space? Because the reason I ask it here is you talked about on a Christopher Nolan set, you've got the space, you've got the room, you've got the time to make mistakes.
No, but time to make a mistake that's a whole other conversation. Just for clarity, I mean, Oppenheimer shot in 57 days.
But you cut
a Bond film was 128 days.
But also, if I've got it right, on Oppenheimer, you sacrificed 30 days.
Yeah, I mean, in the schedule on forehand. I mean, it's a fast and furious shoot. You know,
It's exhausting. What do you drink so much coffee?
yeah, and it's a very, in many ways, a very focused.
Yeah.
But it's speedy. But you know, as we spoke in the beginning, something that you can only do, you know, on adrenaline, and you have to be. A lot of decisions you make, they have to be intuitive, as well as. You know, we watch dailies all the time.
Yeah.
We every night after shooting, we project our dailies, and we project them on analog film. So everybody's there. You know, production designer, the editor is usually there, and the crew. My focus puller is there. So everybody sees the work of the previous days, and everybody can sort of spot their own mistakes and see how they can improve. And by looking at your work constantly, you really can tweak and push things in the right direction in many different ways, and you can, you know, ongoingly you can sort of keep that creative process alive, and I think that's very crucial, you know.
If I can ask one last thing before I'm forcibly ejected, is there a further fit? As I read that when you were going to do Interstellar, at first you couldn't do it because you were doing another film with Tomas Aldredson that didn't come to pass. Are we going to see a reunion of you two at some point?
He's a very dear friend, and it's always one of my dreams to do another film with him. You know. He's now, you know, he's working in Sweden on something very interesting right now. But, you know, I'm sure that somewhere in the future we're going to do something fun together again.
I'd love.
I certainly hope so. I love and always loved our process together.
Yeah. Well, I hope at some point we can meet again so I can explore that a bit more. This has been a delight. Hoyte van Hoytema, correct? Have I got that right?
Still correct,
Hoytema.
yes.
I'm so nervous of getting people's names. Best of luck at the Academy Awards. Huge congratulations on your Oscar nomination. I feel we've barely scratched the surface. I can't wait for round 2. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that brings to an end my conversation with Hoyte van Hoytema. He, as mentioned, he's up for Academy Awards for Oppenheimer, which is available now. I wish him all the very best with that. And it brings to an end this latest episode of Film Stories. So as always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your time. You can find more from me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Simon Brew. More from Film Stories at Film Stories. We're on Facebook.com/Film Stories Online, YouTube.com/Film Stories. You can contribute to the podcast at Patreon.com/Simon Brew. You get it early and ad-free pretty much every week. And then if you go to store.filmstories.co.uk, you'll find our print magazines for sale, and our website with movie, game, TV, news, features, reviews and such like is at filmstories.co.uk. But I think that will do, won't it? Thank you again for your time. Thank you for listening. I'll be back soon with your regular episode of Film Stories. Until then, you all stay safe, look after yourselves, and bye-bye.